Hello everyone, and welcome to another wire wrap video tutorial. My name is Jim McIntosh. Today's project is a great one. It is a nice, elegant, simple to make bangle bracelet with a cabochon. And it is such an exciting piece. I can't wait to show you what it looks like. So, if you're ready, let's head over to the bench and I'm going to show you what we're going to be making. Before we get into the project, I want to give you just a quick glimpse at what we've been doing at the free WrapMakers Club on my website. This piece is great, and it's such an easy, simple piece to make. So if you're interested in it, hop on over to my website. The link is down in the description, and check out what we've been doing in the WrapMakers Club. So let's take a look at what we're going to be making. We're going to be making, now I've got this nice medium-sized cabochon in here, and we're just making just a simple cuff bracelet with this in. And what's interesting is this hook and eye part of this. This just kind of allows you to be able to take this on and off relatively easy. And that's all we're going to be making. Very nice, elegant, simple to make bracelet. Okay, so I've already pre-cut all of my wire. This is 16 gauge square wire. And I'm using this larger wire because I like this as far as a bangle is concerned. I really like a heavier gauge wire. So we're going to be using some 16 gauge. This is 18 inches. It's probably more than you're going to need. But since there are so many different sizes everybody's going to make, I thought I would just go with a standard size to make probably most of the cuff bracelets you're ever going to make. So it's 18 inches of this 16 gauge wire, and then I cut two more pieces of that 16 gauge at 3 inches, and these are going to be the prongs for our setting. So the first thing we want to do is we want to find the center of our long wire, because we're going to start there. So I'm going to set this up, and I'm going to mark the middle of this at 9 inches, and that's just a reference point for us. So there we've got our center. And we can set our tape measure aside. Now, we're going to start by making the eye portion of the hook and eye. So that center mark that I just made, I'm going to take my round nose pliers and I'm going to kind of put them towards the bottom. I'm not quite at the bottom. I probably could go to the bottom, but I'm going to make mine just a little bit above there. And I'm going to take this top portion of it and I'm actually going to bring it over the flat or the round nose, and then I'm going to go past this and I'm going to just make the eye. So this is what I've done, and I've gone to one side. So this particular one I've gone to the right of this straight wire here, and that will make this nice little eye portion for us. So I'm going to use my WrapMaker pliers. I'm going to just kind of straighten this up just a little bit because I kind of got a little off center. So I'm just going to kind of make sure I've got this nice and flat. Now, right here where they cross over, I want to take this portion of it that I curved around the round nose, and I want to bend this. So I'm going to go right here where they intersect, and I want to bend this so that the two sides sit next to one another. And I'll show you what I mean by that in just a second. Let me kind of do my side first. I got a little off center, so hold on. There we go. Got to twist that so it's right. I want these to sit flat next to one another. So here I've got the two wires are now next to one another. And then I've got this nice little eye portion here. This is going to be for the clasp, and I just want to make sure that they're flat right where they are. So let me show you from the side. So both wires are sitting flat right on the other end of this loop that I made here. And they're sitting flat, and that's what I want. And I'm going to take a piece of tape just to hold these two together, because what I'm going to do is I want to add a wrap right here where the eye portion starts to flatten out. I'm going to add about 4, 5, 6 wraps there. I'm going to use 18 gauge half round wire. So I'm going to pull off just a piece of this. Let's see, I'm going to grab, that should be enough. About 4 inches of it. And I am going to take my WrapMaker pliers and I'm going to hold this here where I want to start my wrap. And I'm going to take my wrap wire, I'm going to put it in between the jaws here, and I'm going to start my wrap. And this is just to secure these two sides together. So there's 1, here's 2, here's 3. What I want to do now that I've got 3 of them is I want to take my wrap, I want to push it so that it's right up against that loop. Okay, and now I'm going to take the long tail portion and I'm going to go to the opposite side of it. See, so this will be the inside of my bangle. So I've got 3, let's kind of add 1 more. There's 4. So I've got 4 complete wraps on there, and both of them end on the back side of this. And that's where I want to trim it. I'm going to trim these off right about there. I always do half of the width of the, so I'm right here in the middle of those. And I'll do the same thing over here. I'm going to just trim this off there. And I want to set these in place, so I always flatten them. And the other thing I want to do, and this sometimes I have to use 2 sets of pliers. I've got another set of flat nose here, but the loop that I've made is just slightly off, just a little bit, and that happens when you're using square wire. So before we move on, I just want to kind of, so I'm going to hold it with flat nose, and I'm going to take my WrapMaker pliers, and I just want to kind of flatten this. Now if you're using smaller wire like 18 gauge wire, which is probably the smallest I would recommend for this, you may need to kind of take your bench block, and you may need to take a raw hide mallet and kind of make this a little harder by tapping it. That makes the wire harder, stiffens up the wire a bit so that this is a nice strong eye portion of this. But since I'm using 16 gauge wire, I'm not going to have to worry about that. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to make another wrap, and we want to do this over here towards the end. Now you need to decide how big of a bracelet you're going to be making. Bangle bracelets usually fit loose on a wrist, so you don't want it to be exactly the size of the wrist. So let's say you measured the person's wrist that you're making this for, and they have a 5-inch wrist. You're going to want to make it slightly larger than that. Now remember, you've got a little bit of this eye here that's going to make up the clasp, as well as a hook that's going to fit in there. So that's going to take a little bit of extra room. And I would probably say it's going to take between 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch extra space, depending on how big you make all of these things. So I always make these, I measure the length down here, the size that I want to make it, the size of the wrist, plus about 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 inch. So starting where we began that wrap right here, that's where I'm going to set the 0 on my measuring tape here. And I'm going to measure down the length. I'm going to be making a 6-inch bangle. So I'm going to actually mark the edge of this at 6 1/4 inches. So I'm down here. Let me show you what I did. I'm right here, 6 1/4 inches. And that's where I'm going to make another wrap. Now this wrap, I'm actually going to start at this and work my way toward the eye. And I'm going to make another 4 or 5 wraps. You don't need a lot of wraps here, so I'm just going to cut another piece, another small piece of half-round wire. I'm going to take my WrapMaker pliers and I'm going to position them where I want to start my wrap. And since we're going to be doing this, I'm going to actually, I should have measured it. Should have marked it on the other side, but that's fine. We can always flip that under, because this is the top of the piece. So I'm going to take my wrap wire here. Oops, things are shifting. There we go. And we're going to make just 4 more wraps here. That's 2, that's 3, and there's number 4. Now remember, I started on the front of it, so I want to take the piece that I started with, and I want to flip it to the underside. This is the inside, so all of this will be hidden from view. And we want to set the wrap in place there. And we're going to trim off the excess wrap wire. And there we are. Okay, so we've got this, let me push these ends down. So we've got this kind of set up. We need to now work on the setting. And the setting is going to go right up here. I can take this piece of tape off because it's going to get in the way also. We got more tape that we can use. So what we want to do is we're going to need to know how big the stone is, how to measure the stone. So let's see how long this stone is. This piece of malachite that I'm working with is 26 millimeters. So we're going to measure, starting here, we want to find the center. So half of 26 is 13. So what we're going to do is we're going to line this up about where this wrap begins, and we're going to go down here to 13, and we're going to mark that as the center. Now we said that this is 26 millimeters. We want to actually make a cut and wrap area that is half that length. So that's 13. So we're going to line up that center mark with 6.5, and we're going to start. This is where the wrap is going to begin, and then down here at 13 is where our wrap is going to end. This is the cut and wrap area for this particular piece, so we want to do that right now. So we're going to use our flat file. And again, remember, I always put something here on the outside of these. Now this particular one you don't have to worry about because we've got a wrap there. But this other side, just so that things stay together as we're filing that little groove in there, we're going to put a piece of tape just outside of the end of this wrap. And I want to get my flat file. And I'm going to start by just I'm going to put lines with the corner of this. I'm going to use this narrow side, but on the corner, I'm going to use that to just give me an idea where my starting point is. So I'm going to take a couple of passes with this to put a definite line there, groove. And we'll do the same thing over here on the other side. We're going to put it on edge. We're going to just take a couple of passes. And what that does is that gives us kind of a shoulder on there, a nice squared shoulder, so that the wrap wire does not move from there. And I forgot one other thing. Dang it. See, look at me, look at me. I forgot to add these. These are the pieces we're going to want. Let me tape these together right quick. See, guys, good thing I remembered before. And these are 3 inches long, and we're going to find the center of these, and we're going to measure the center at 1.5 inches, and we're going to line those centers up with the center of the bracelet wire. So there's the center, and now we just want to kind of take the tape off of these. And we're going to line each one up at the center mark, and you notice I already got rid of my center mark, so I actually have to put my center mark back in. Well, this is how things go. So we're going to mark that center again, So there's where we began, and it was at 6.5, right about there. And now we can take these two wires, and what we want to do is we want to line up one of these wires on each side of that wrap. So that center mark will go right there. See, so I've got it lined up with there, and then we're going to do one on the other side. Let's take this tape off, because we're going to use another piece of tape. So I've got one there, and we're going to take the other one and put the other one just outside. These are our prong wires, and these are important because if we don't have the prong wires, we cannot set the stone. So I'm going to put a piece of tape just outside where the wrap ends, and we'll do the same thing on the other end. Now this time we will definitely need a piece of tape outside of the other end. So there's where I started this, and you'll notice there's a little bit of a gap that we've got to kind of span that gap a bit. And to do that, to kind of close that gap up, I always like to just kind of go in here and give it a nice little squeeze. Make sure it stays flat there. See, so I brought that in, and these guys kind of went outward. And just make sure that you've got your tape on there really good. Okay, now we're back to where we were. So we've got to actually kind of cut across these again, because we want to put a line in where they all come together, and then I can start to file some of this away. Let's put a line on the other side too. There we go, a couple good passes, and now we're just going to finish cutting our groove. So you guys, that's the thing with sometimes making a mistake or forgetting something. It's not always impossible to go back and fix. You can kind of just catch up and do a little bit of this pretty quickly. I like to leave my mistakes in just so you can see that this type of artwork, it's not impossible. We can overcome some of the challenges. And I'm just going to turn it around to make sure everything's nice and flat. Okay, so it looks like that should be good. Okay, so let's set all of this aside. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we now want to add a wrap wire in that area that we just cut away. And again, we're using 18 gauge half round wire. This time I'm going to pull off a little bit bigger of a piece. I'm probably going to get about a 6 or 7 inch long piece. And I'm going to wrap this section just like we've been wrapping those other two areas. I'm going to put my WrapMaker pliers where I want to begin my wrap. And then I just insert it in between the jaws. And then we just start our wrap. Now this one, since we've cut this area on the top, this is the area that's going to be against the stone. We want to make sure that we leave the cut ends of our wrap underneath the stone. See, so if you let me explain that. So here's the top part of the eye portion of our clasp. This is going to be the top of the stone will be right here. So we want to make sure we hide our wraps underneath the stone. The cut ends rather of our wrap we want to put underneath the stone. So every couple of wraps you just want to make sure that you set it in place so that things don't move. And it's nice tight. We want a good tight wrap on here. Okay, probably got one or two more. So there's one. And that looks like we may, yeah, that's just what we want right there. Okay, so we've got our wrap. Let's cut our ends. Cut it right in the center there. And we'll cut this one right in the center. There we go. And we can take our tape off. And the one thing I always show you guys, I do like to take the wrap, especially this cut and wrap area. I do like to put it on my bench block and give it a few taps So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this face down, and I've got the loop sitting off of my stone. And I'm going to take my mallet and just give it a few wraps with this, just so that it keeps it nice and strong. Okay, just to make sure we've got a good set and that it's sitting inside that groove really well. So now you can take your prong wires and bring them out 45 degrees. That just gives us an approximation, gives us a starting place for putting our stone in. Okay, and I like these. See, I like these nice and squared up here on here. I like them nice and pulled out. So I always take my pliers, and just so that they don't have this curve to them, but they come straight out. And should be good on both of these. This also puts some tension on that wrap, that center wrap, to hold everything in place. So now you should be able to set your stone on here. See? And everything should be kind of where you want them. Move your wires to where you want them. Now, since this is such a narrow stone, I like them down towards the end. I got tape all over me. Hold on. There we go. So the last bit that we want to do is we want to actually take, I'm going to flip, this is the bottom or the inside of my piece. It's opposite the way the loop goes. I'm going to set my tape across it, and then I want to put my stone face down on my work surface, and I want to center this on here. Center the stone, and then I'm going to tape my stone, the setting to my stone, just so that we can mark the hold on, there we go. Let's get this right. Okay, stone, there we are. Sometimes you just need to be a little patient. It'll go on and everything will work out. There, so we want to make sure we've got everything centered on here. And I've actually got this too low. There we go. Okay, because I want my stone to be right up against that loop, just so it doesn't take up too much space. Now we're going to mark each prong where it comes out from the stone. So where it comes out of the stone, just make a little mark across each of the prongs, and that's going to be the bend point. We want a nice sharp bend in each of these prongs. Now we can take the stone off of the setting, out of the setting here. We should have a mark on each one of these all the way around the stone. And to make the prong, all we're going to do is we're going to set your WrapMaker pliers here and just give them a bend toward you. So we want this, see, here's the top of our loop. We're bending it away from the piece. So just do each one that way. You line them up, and then you sharp bend. Same thing down here, sharp bend, and then the final one, sharp bend. There. So now it looks like a person falling. Ah! It's sad, isn't it? So we can put our stone in, and this will tell us whether we've got things centered and flat where we want them, and it should fit there in there snugly. And if it doesn't, then you need to go and make some adjustments before you do anything else. So notice mine's sitting flat in the setting, and that's good. So since I do have them I have all four of these sitting flat, I'm going to take each one, I'm just going to push it over the stone, and I do this in opposites. So I started here, I'm going to go over here, I'll push this guy over, and then I'll push that one over, and this one over. Okay, so it's now nice and tight up against here, and we can trim off some of the ends of here, and I'm leaving some of this. So you notice I trimmed, there's still some of the wire that's above the stone. I'm going to just trim off this excess prong wire. This will give us some room to make our final adjustments on prongs. Okay, so I cut them all short, and now I want to give them kind of a final place where I want to set them. And I just want, on here, I'll explain. So this has a deep shoulder, so this is a flat shoulder, and then it curves over to the top of the stone. It domes at the top of the stone. So I want just some of this to be able to put over the top of the stone. So trim off some of it. See, I've got just maybe 2 millimeters above the stone, and that should be good. So now I want to do the next one very similar to that. I want to make these all four kind of even, and it's better to cut too long than too short. Okay, so we can't add wire. We can always subtract, but we cannot add wire. So cutting these, I look at them from the side just to make sure that I've got them cut short enough. Very good. And I'm using some thick heavy gauge wire. And this one's just slightly too long here. That ought to be good. Now be careful that you're not chasing the length to try to get the perfect length, because you'll get to the point where you cut too much off, and then you got to start your prongs all over again. So our prongs are cut. Now, if you've watched any of my other prong set videos, I always take and shape these, and I use my rotary tool with my with this bit in it. This is a silicone rubber polishing wheel, and if you need to find these, you can look down in the description. You can find all the tools for this project. But this is what I'm going to put in my rotary tool, and I'm going to shape the ends. And then what we want is the ends to have a curve. We want to curve them, and so we're going to take some of the bulk out of these prongs. We're going to cut from right here at the bottom of it, and we're just going to make a nice curved shape. You can use a needle file, a flat needle file, and just take some of that off and give it a shape, clean that up. You can just take and do this. I find that these polishing wheels work much better to do that. So that's what we're going to do right now. Now, before you do any of the cutting and shaping on these, we have to remove this stone. Never, ever, ever cut these prongs with the stone in. You will make a mistake and hit the stone, and you could put some just difficult marks into it that you're going to just hate yourself for doing. So we've got the polishing wheel in here, and I'm just going to just start using it to cut some of these just a little bit. Okay, so we've got all four of the prongs cut and shaped. You can't really see it very well, even though I am using some larger wire here, but these have a nice curve to them, and they should look really good on the stone. But we're not going to actually set our stone yet. That's going to be our last thing we're going to do. The next thing we want to do is we actually want to shape the bracelet. And it's easier to shape it because we're going to be doing a little bit of tapping with our rawhide mallet. And actually, it's something good you might want to do before we go much further is you might actually want to put this area in between the setting and that end wrap. You want to kind of, first of all, I want to straighten that out, but I'm going to put it on my bench block. I'm going to give it some taps. The reason why I'm doing this is I want to kind of firm up that metal. And do this especially if you're using 18 gauge wire, because we want some nice firm wire here. Now another thing you can actually do is you can actually wrap this whole area right here. I don't do that because I don't want to use all of that wire. to wrap that, and I find it's a little cleaner this way, but it does look really good, especially if you put a pattern in this as you go around. You know, if you weave a pattern in there, it looks really good. So I'm going to do the end also. This is going to make up this wire here from this wrap out is going to make up the hook that we're going to put in here. So I want that nice and firm as well. And we're going to be doing some more tapping on this after we get it all shaped how we want it. So I'm going to start now. It's best to start off small and make it larger. So let's say you're making a 6-inch like I'm making. You want to kind of start off smaller than a 6-inch. Now I've got my homemade bracelet mandrel here, and I know down here is probably around 6-ish. So this was a 6 1/4 or 6 right here. So I'm going to go a little bit below there. Now what I'm doing is I'm going to hold the setting onto there, and then I'm going to bend this around around my mandrel to give it its basic shape. Remember, this is only a basic shape because we're going to now start maneuvering this so that it's in its final shape. And all I'm doing is now I'm just using my hands, and I may need to straighten this out just a little bit because I got it kind of curved. I bent it a little bit, so we want to make sure that we've got this bent around in the right spot. So all I'm doing is just making subtle bends in this as we go. See, I'm just giving it the shape that I want, remembering that this is going to make a hook on this end. Okay, this is where everything's going to hook together right here. We want to make sure that we've got everything bent correctly. So I keep kind of refining my shape. And I want to make sure that this gets on top there. Okay, so that is kind of what we're going for. So what I want to do is I want to trim some of this excess wire off. Now we're going to let me measure this a bit. I'm going to cut off right now, this initial cut. I'm going to cut about 1 inch, leaving 1 inch rather. So I'm going to cut right about in here of this excess wire. And that's just a starting point for us. So cut both of those so that this is about 1 inch. And you got to decide which side you want, which one of these two wires you want to hook. If you want this top one here, you want it to hook in like this, because I always go across the other one. So I'm actually going to do I'm going to use this right wire here to be my my hook. So what am I going to do with this other one? Well, this other one, I'm actually going to push it into the center. Let's move some of our tools here. I'm going to kind of bring this to the center. Let me show you what I'm doing. See this. Okay, so let me show you what I'm doing. I'm taking, there's the wire I'm working with. It's now facing me. It's closest to me. And I'm just going to bend it over the wrap that I made right here. And then I'm going to trim it, and I'm going to push it up against my wrap. So I've trimmed it short. I'm going to push that against the wrap. See, so what I've done? So I've just curved it over the wrap, and I'm going to push it down as far as it'll go. Just like that. Now that's thick. That's gonna rub up against somebody. So what am I gonna do? I'm going to take our tool again, our polisher, and we're going to take some of that bulk out of it. Okay, so I want to show you what I've done. I have taken this down considerably, and I always feel it to make sure there's no rough edge on it, but notice how much, I probably took half of the width or the thickness of that. I've taken probably half of that out. Don't go too thin. If you go too thin, it makes it weak and brittle and it'll just snap off, but leave some of this bulk in it. Okay, so that's that. So I want to now make my hook. And this is rather simple to do. I'm going to add well, let me straighten my wire out a little bit. I've been fiddling with this. I kind of get it out of whack there. There we go. Okay, so like I said, I want to now make this hook go this way into the eye. So we're going to start by just making giving ourselves an idea as to where we want that to hook. And I want to do it probably right about in here. And I'm just going to make a nice little hook, just using WrapMaker pliers here. And I'm just going to make my first hook, and I want to see if that's close enough for it should be. That looks like it's probably, and let me show you about how long I've made this. I have made this approximately 10 millimeters is where the bend is. That's what, 1/4 of an inch? Yeah, it's about 1/4 of an inch is where I've made this initial bend, and I'm just making just a simple hook. Okay, so there's my hook. Now, we want to cut this tip off. We don't need all of this hook. When it comes to making a hook clasp, you don't want a hook that's closed like this, because that makes it so hard to get this bracelet on and off that it will drive the person crazy, because there won't be enough to do it. Okay, so what I always do is I cut it. I'll leave it as a nice hook, so I'm going to cut it just past the hook, with past the top of this curve. I'm going to cut it. That's my initial cut. That's not our final cut, but I'm going to now put it in there, and I want just enough of this to where it just starts to curve over. So let me show you. So you notice where I'm just barely starting to curl over it. So I've got plenty on here. I'm actually going to trim it just a little bit more, just a touch more, and I'm going to clean up the end of this hook there. See how I've got it just as it's starting to curve downward? This will allow it to go on and off. And if I didn't curl it enough, you can always go back and make a slight adjustment to everything. Like I've got it too bent there, so we're going to there. See, and you want to kind of, and what we're going to do is we want to make sure that when you push this out, it springs open. And that's why I like to use a thicker metal, because I like it to pop open. I want it to spring right open. So we're going to just finish our curves. Now we want this area to be open, just like this, so about 1/2 inch to be able to get it in. It won't go on me because I've got giant fat wrists, but I do have enough to where I can clasp it open and closed. Okay, and if your wire, I like to use sterling for this because sterling has a little more springiness to it. I find that copper does not always have a good springiness. Now, if you're using a larger wire, like let's say a 16 or a 14 gauge copper wire, then you might get that springiness that you want. But I find that I just don't get that springiness. So now what I want to do is I want to shape the end of this slightly, just take out some of that, some of these rough edges, just so that it's a little cleaner. So let me do that right quick. Okay, so we've taken some of that we've rounded this off, and all I did was kind of just took that blunt cut end on it. I took it off a bit. So now everything should work really well. If you have to make another adjustment, like I might want to use my round nose just a little bit. The only reason why I'm saying that is because I think I want to put just a touch more of a curve in this. Just a touch, not a whole lot. Yeah, like that. Something else you might want to think about doing is taking this and putting it on your bench block. And if I can get it on my bench block, I don't have an anvil, so I'm going to kind of offset this just a little bit because I want to kind of harden this as well. So you just kind of just work it in there as best you can to just be able to tap that curve with your rawhide mallet. I'm using the side of my bench block, and that works out just fine. Okay, so before we set the stone, we want to make sure that we put this back on whatever we used to curve the bracelet, and this is why I prefer to have some sort of hard wood or something, because I want to tap this to bring some of that springiness into the piece. And what we're doing is, all we're doing is we're hardening the metal. We're taking those molecules and we're bringing those molecules together so that it's nice and stiff, that the metal is. So I'm just going to take my time and tap around the metal a bit to be able to give it a springiness. And I'll show you what I mean by that in just a second. Since I'm using a heavier gauge metal, shouldn't have to do that much tapping on this. Now just make our final adjustments here to make sure. See, so now look what we've got. We've got a nice open piece here, and we're going to have to just do some slight reshaping just to make sure, because I've taken some of the shape out. So I'm going to bring some of this back in, and I want to just be able to put it on there. So now when I push this in around the eye, or it should pop open. Okay, so that's our final section right there, and I just want to kind of fix this end just a little bit. Okay, there. I think I've got what I want, and then we can just kind of, you want a gap, about a ½ inch gap there. Okay. So the last thing we need to do is we need to set our stone. So put your stone back in the setting. Make sure everything is where you want it. It's sitting nice and flat. Now, you always adjust your, whoops, look, did you notice this? This prong is out of place. Yeah, that could be a problem. Let's adjust that. Put our prong back where it was. Okay. You work in opposites. If you're going to set this prong, you set this prong, and then this prong, and this prong. The reason why is you want that stone in the setting, centered in the setting. So for this particular one, I'm going to start down here because this looks like it's going to give me a problem. So take your pliers, using my WrapMakers, they work great as flat nose. I'm going to put one jaw at the bottom, and then the other jaw at the top of the prong, and all I'm doing is, whoops, I squeezed instead of pushed. I'm just going to push that prong over slightly. Be very, very careful. If you slip, softer stones will scratch if your pliers slip off there. So we're going to do the same thing over here. We're at the bottom, push this over the stone, and then we're going to do the opposite side. So we're going to start at the bottom, push over the stone, and then here at the last one at the bottom and push over the stone. Now you go through and make sure that all of the prongs are pointing toward the center, and make adjustments if you have to. It looks like this there. Yeah, my prong was in the wrong place. So this is what we've ended up with. We've got this nice little piece here, nice little bangle style bracelet with a stone set in it, and you just need to polish the metal. That's all you need to do, and that's it. I told you that was an easy piece to make, and it works great with just about with most size wires. I do prefer that larger wire only because it gives you a much firmer piece. So please experiment with it, add some things, add your own spin to it. That's a great idea too. There's lots of ways that you can do it. You can open up the wires a little bit that go around the wrist. To kind of open that up a little bit, maybe add some things on the inside of that. There's lots of things you can do. If you're into wire weaving, this might be something that you can add that little touch to. So there's lots of things that you can make with it. So please don't just be happy with just this basic piece, but really explore it and make that piece your own. All right? Great. Well, again, my name is Jim McIntosh, and I'm so happy that you stopped by. And as always, don't forget, practice, practice, practice.